Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Joe, and I'm joined today by my very good friend Chris Allan.
Hello.
Hello, Chris. Chris is the big boss at Your D+I. And today we're just going to do a recording just to get to know Chris, really, understand a little bit about what makes him tick, understand some of his motivation into going into diversity and inclusion, and what's led him to be the absolutely wonderful man he is today.
I mean, that's an introduction, Joe. Like, I'm a little nervous. I'm not gonna lie. I'm used, like I said to you at the start, like I'm used to being on the other side asking the questions. So this should be fun.
Brilliant. So before we get into the questions, really, I just want to bring something up that you've mentioned that I think is very interesting, which is kind of part of the reason we're doing this, I suppose. And one of the things is that when people see you doing diversity and inclusion training, they wonder why you're doing it.
Yeah. So it's come up quite a lot in the last couple of months, I'd say. So I've been running a number of workshops, have quite a presence on LinkedIn when it comes to talking about D&I. And one question I keep on getting, or one statement I keep on getting is, well, what's a white cisgendered male doing in the D&I space? Which is interesting for me, I suppose, because people obviously, I'm not very public about my sexuality, so not a lot of people know within the professional network that I'm gay, and that's one of the reasons why I got into D&I, amongst many others.
Brilliant. So yeah, we just like to explore that a little bit, I think, and just go through your past a little bit and your background and explore some of those themes. So I suppose one of the first things that would be good to know is when did you realize that you were gay?
I think I was about 14, and was in high school and noticed that there was an attraction to one of the boys in class. Wasn't really sure what to do with the information and just thought it was like one of those things, didn't really pay much attention to it. And it wasn't until I was 16 that my best friend at the time came to stay at my house. And as you do when your mum and dad go away on holiday and leaving the house on your own, we nicked a bottle of vodka. And we were in my bedroom that night and he said, I've got something to tell you. And I was like, okay, what is it? And he said, I think I'm bisexual. And I was like, oh, okay, this sounds like something that I might be, like I might relate to. And I was like, I think I'm bisexual as well. And he was like, oh, amazing. And then he said, and this was a long time ago, he said along the lines of, who do you fancy? And I've always been quite fond of a bigger, hairier guy. And he said, oh, I really fancy Beppy from EastEnders. Now, for those of you who can't remember that far back, not the best looking person in the world, if I'm going to admit. And he said, oh, I really fancy Jamie from EastEnders, who was like a young heartthrob at the time and kind of very, very attractive. And then we didn't really see anything more about it. And it's something that played on my mind for a number of years. I thought, he's not mentioned it. Like, I don't know if he's like changed his mind. He might not be bisexual anymore, and all this kind of thing. So I kind of thought no more of it for a couple of years, and then thoughts started to come into my head a little bit more. And I was like, oh, actually, maybe I am attracted to men as well as women. So yeah, that was probably the first time, I'd say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So yeah, I assume there was a moment or a time when you decided that actually you wanted to tell the world and embrace it, the coming out with that. So how did people react when you did that? Like friends, family? Start with family, I suppose. That's always I've been told that that can be quite difficult and quite challenging.
I mean, it was and it wasn't. I got questioned by my mum about 6 months beforehand, before I came out, about a large telephone bill that we were getting. So I'm now 36, so I would have been 19 at the time, 36 next month. I was 19 at the time. My mum was like, we're getting really high telephone bills. So this was before your dating apps. This was kind of really before your big internet chat rooms and things like that. So I was going on telephone chats and chatting to people and things like that. I was really curious about kind of what was out there. And I was like, oh, I've no idea why they're so high. Blaming it on my two teenage sisters, and thinking they must be doing something. So it got to a point where I was dating a girl who my mum had set me up with. So she worked for my mum, and dating her and being on these telephone chat line services, I got talking to a guy, and we decided to meet. So we went for a date to the cinema. We went to see The Aviator, which was probably one of the worst films that you could go and see it as a date, because it's really long. But and we decided to be boyfriends, and I kind of had a bit of a moment where I was like, well, actually, I've got a girlfriend as well. Like, I'm going to have to do something about this here. So I went to my mum, and I said to my mum, I said, we were lying on the sofa. This was a ritual that we had most nights. She lay on one sofa, I lay on another. We used to watch trash on TV, and she was like, everything okay? And I was like, oh, I think I've got something to tell you. And she was like, okay. I said, I'm seeing someone. And she was like, oh yeah, I know you're seeing Ruth. And I was like, I'm seeing someone else as well. And she said, okay. And I said, it's a guy. I said, I think I might be bisexual. And my mum's response was like, oh, okay, that's fine. She's like, you do you. Like, I'm quite happy. That's absolutely fine. But you need to tell Ruth. Which she had a point. So that night I messaged her and kind of said, look, this is the situation. She ended up moving to Aberdeen. I don't know if that was because of the situation or not, but she moved a very, very long way after we ended things. And kind of left it be for the night and went to work the next day, came home from work. My two sisters, one of which was, so Kerry would have been 18 and Claire would have been about 14 or 15. And they came running up to me as I came home and said, oh, Mum told us you're gay. And I was like, no, I'm bisexual. And my mum just looked at me and she went, Christopher, and just gave me a look. And I was like, okay, yeah, actually, I am gay. And then that was kind of it. She was like, but you have to tell your dad, you need to have this conversation. And I didn't tell my dad initially. I told my sisters, I started telling some of my friends, and they were all not shocked. I mean, I thought I'd done a really good job of keeping it hidden, but apparently everybody knew apart from me. It could have been the blonde highlights or the pink highlights I was getting in my hair, which could have been a bit of a giveaway. But yeah, apparently everybody knew, and they were like, it's fine, it's no big deal. And the next person to tell was my brother. My brother was, at the time, and he probably won't forgive me for this, a bit of a chav, shall we say, and hung around with some scary people. And I was really terrified of telling him based on what I thought his reaction was going to be. And I went to his house and said, I have something to tell you. And he was like, you're really worrying me. What is it? And he was like, are you dying? And I was like, no, like, I'm fine. I said, but I'm gay. And he was like, oh. And he was like, for F's sake. He said, I've always known. Like, he was like, you're my brother. I love you. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, I don't care. And I was like, oh, well, that's kind of gone better than I expected. Later on, I'd kind of split up with the first guy I went with. He was very, very strange. And started seeing someone else. He was from Glasgow. I was living in Edinburgh, or just outside Edinburgh. And things were getting a bit serious. We were talking about moving in together. I still hadn't told my dad. And after we moved in together, I phoned my dad and I said, look, this is the situation. And my dad probably didn't take it very well, partly because he wasn't the first or wasn't part of the first people to know, and I'd kept it from him. But also he was from like a really masculine place of work. Like he was a truck driver, and kind of it wasn't really the done thing to like be talking about gay stuff. And when you're a truck driver, it's like very masculine environment. So he kind of struggled with it and initially didn't want me to tell anybody. Yeah, the next person after that was my gran, who is a devout Catholic and like very religious lady, beautiful lady. But initially she didn't really understand it, and she was like, "You'll never be able to get married, you'll never be able to have kids." And I was like, "No, I'll be able to do all these things. Like I'm able to do that now." And she's taken a lot of time to get used to the idea, as has my dad, but both of them are in a really good place now and both very, very accepting of me. So so the family, they all took it relatively well. I think I was quite lucky. I did lose a lot of friends when I came out. I had a lot of male straight friends who all thought as soon as I came out that I was going to want to sleep with them, which just wasn't the case at all. So yeah, that was kind of my big coming out story, I suppose.
Okay. So maybe not necessarily something to answer now, but maybe something to circle back to a bit later on. If you were to give any advice or a piece of advice to someone who wants to have that same conversation but isn't really sure how to begin or who to speak to first, what kind of advice would you give to someone in that situation?
I think it's slightly easier now, I think, for people to come out. Not to say that it's always an easy thing to do, because it's not. It shouldn't be as much of a thing as what it is. But I would say just embrace it and just have an honest conversation with whoever it is that you want to come out to. If it's your parents, in all honesty, as much as they won't want to admit it to themselves sometimes, your parents have probably already known for a long time. Like, I wanted to be a hairdresser when I was 5 years old, and I used to spend most of my afternoons cutting my sister's Barbie's hair. That was a bit of a trigger for my mum. I never really wanted to hang out with friends. I used to want to hang out with my mum and all her friends. And I probably should have realised that when I was 16 and Queer as Folk first came out on TV, my mum used to call me in from playing football to watch it with her. So she always known. So I think on some level, your parents, if you are coming out, your parents probably have known at some point. But if you're not comfortable talking to your parents, talk to your friends about it. It's not as scary as sometimes it's made out to be.
Brilliant. So that's the start of the journey, I suppose. And now look at you, look how far you've come. But yeah, has this ever impacted your working life at all? Has there been any stigmas that you've overcome, or any sort of anything really? How has it, or has it not impacted your working life?
It has. So I was quite fortunate when I came out that the people I worked with were also really good friends, and we're a really tight-knit community, so they were very accepting of it. I never really had any issues. It wasn't until I was 24, 25, I got headhunted for a menswear brand. So I had a long career in retail, and they'd asked me to come and open one of the new stores. And the store was very successful. I was a store manager. We were selling things like men's jeans, jumpers, box shorts, all that kind of stuff. And I remember having a conversation with my assistant manager, and she said, "What are you doing this weekend?" And I said, "I'm going away with my partner at the time." And she said, "Oh, what does she do?" And I said, "Oh, actually, it's a he." And she was like, "Oh, cool. That's cool." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, of course it's cool." So I thought nothing more of it. Went away for the weekend. Came back on the Monday, and my regional manager was in the office, and he said, "Oh, can we have a chat?" So took me to one side, and I was like, "Yeah." And I just thought I wanted to talk about the performance of the store and like how things were going and all that kind of stuff. And he said, it's been brought to my attention that the lifestyle that you lead outside of work isn't the lifestyle that we promote as a business. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, well, I can't remember what her name was, but she'd said that you were away with your boyfriend over the weekend. And he said, you didn't really disclose that information as part of the interview. And I was like, well, I didn't really have to. Like, it's a very small part of who I am. And actually, it's got no reflection on my ability to do the job. And he said, yeah, but the type of customers that we're trying to attract into the shop are lads. And he said, if it gets out that obviously you're not one of the lads, then that may affect store sales. And I was just like flabbergasted that this was actually being directed at me, having never really experienced anything like it before. And he said, so for that reason, I'm going to have to terminate your contract from today. And I was like, why? And he said, just your lifestyle doesn't reflect what we're trying to promote here. So I got escorted off the premises like a criminal, out the back door, didn't get to say goodbye to my staff or anything like that, explain what was going on. I was just left to like go on my merry way. And it absolutely floored me because, again, I'd never really experienced discrimination before. Like, it had never really been an issue with places I'd worked before. And this one person's bias towards gay people or misunderstanding about what gay people are had given him an overriding view of what he thought I should be as a manager. I mean, I'm 6'4", I'm a big guy, like I have a really big presence. There's no getting away from that. And when I was on the shop floor, it was very obvious that I had that big presence and it never, ever affected anything. But in his eyes, he was thinking of his business and he thought it was going to affect him. So I did go to HR after I'd been sacked and kind of said, look, this is the situation. She was like, it's his decision. There's not much we can do. And I explained like what was said. And she was like, oh, that's a little different. And I got a letter and they offered me like a couple of grand to kind of go on my way and not talk about it any further. And at that point, I was like, I'll just take it because I needed a job. I needed money. I had bills to pay. But my God, did that affect me going into other jobs after that. So I kind of kept it a bit of a secret that I was gay or that I was seeing someone at the time or any of that. So yeah, it definitely affected me. It took me a long time to come to terms with it. And it probably wasn't until I joined the university that I kind of felt a bit more comfortable in having those types of conversations and more open conversations about who I was with and my sexuality and things like that. It was a much more inviting space to talk about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice of phrase, I think, that they use, that you almost don't come across as one of the boys.
Yeah.
It's interesting that can be equated to sexuality. Out of curiosity, I mean, for a lot of people, you almost think that the stigma around homosexuality, that's the 70s. Yeah. It's not something we do in the modern age, but this was only a few years ago.
Yeah, you're talking, that was 11 years ago. It was pre-Equalities Act, so there wasn't really any legal implications for kind of what he was doing at the time, really. But yeah, there's still a surprising amount of stigma attached to being gay, for definite.
Why do you think that is? And you're right. It is definitely still a thing, but it's almost difficult to understand why.
Personally, I believe it's misrepresentation in media or underrepresentation in media. So when you think of someone gay on TV, for instance, you automatically go to someone who's camp. So name a gay TV presenter, for instance, it would be Alan Carr or someone like that, someone who's super camp. And it's the same in TV shows. When there's the gay best friend, he has to be the super flamboyant camp version of what being gay is. And I think that's partly to do with it. There's no one, and I'm not saying I'm super masculine in any way, shape, or form, but like there's no one who's like me, or a lot of people like me on TV that I can relate to, and that actually shows a different side of being gay without being outlandish. So I think that's part of the problem. I think it's just sometimes it's ignorance as well. I think people like, and I think it all stems from perception and representation of what people have always thought and always seen. It's like when my gran said, "You'll never be able to have kids. You'll never be able to have a family." That's because her generation, it just wasn't really a thing. Obviously, times have moved on now, but even now in this day and age, there's still the stigma and the representation of gays in the media that we are in one box.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting point. The way you've put that, and yeah, it's something I've said to you before, that when I first met you, there was nothing that said gay, that said you were. That I didn't get that almost that vibe, I suppose. It's coming back to what you were saying about that representation and what people are almost expecting.
Yeah.
Which is not something that I got from you at all. You're just Chris. You're just Chris to me.
I left my rainbow flag at home that day, Joe. So
see, that was it. That was it.
That was it.
So there's one other thing that I'd be really keen to ask you and to explore. If you could go back and if you could give your younger self any bit of advice at any point of your journey, from when you spoke to your parents to your professional life to where you are now, what bit of advice would you give? Or if not to you, then just to anybody.
First bit of advice would, don't dye your hair blonde, or don't dye your hair pink. I was also a very large person in my late teens, early 20s. I was 24 stone, and it wasn't a good look for me. So that would be the first thing, is don't dye your hair ridiculous colors.
You have such nice hair though now.
A beautiful hair.
Yeah, that's a long for hair like that.
Clear balding quiff, as I like to call it. Take risks, I suppose. That sounds really cliche, but I'm now 35 and running my own business, and I never ever thought that that's something I'd be able to do. But without being able to take a risk, I would never have known, and I don't know where I would have been if I'd taken a bigger risk when I was younger. So be open to risks, be open to being challenged, be open to challenging people, and don't be afraid of who you are. I'd say that is probably the biggest thing.
Brilliant. So I hope everyone has found that educational and enlightening, a little insight into Chris and his background. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Joseph, and thank you for interviewing me and being so kind. I really appreciate it.
It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.